Okay, our next group, probably the most important group because we can't have fun unless we're paying for the fun. And it's easier to pay for the fun if you're using somebody else's money, which has been my strategy all along. But our sponsorship panel is very, very important because that is the fuel that runs racing. It's not the 120 octane that you put in the cars. So again, we'll go down our group here and we'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Ken Unger.
Thanks, Dennis. My name is Ken Unger. I'm the president of U.S. Sports Advisors. We're based here in Indianapolis. We're a sports and entertainment marketing agency. We work in the NFL, the NBA, Olympic sports, and I have 17 years in the motorsports industry. And as a speaker said this morning, once you get in, they don't let you out. So very proud of that.
And Jordan is our next speaker, and he's a Chicago guy.
I am a Chicago guy. My name is Jordan Bressler. I'm the president of a company called TSMGI. We're a brand marketing company, work mostly with Fortune 500 organizations and help them with sponsorship and activate their brands throughout motorsport. I've been in the business for almost 25 years.
And next up is Sam Scott.
Hello, my name is Sam Scott. I'm presently with Sports Management Network in Detroit, but prior to that, I grew up here in the state of Indiana and had a passion for motorsports and got involved with Arvin Industries and the automotive aftermarket, which kind of introduced me to this whole aftermarket and performance business. I knew I wasn't going to be an engineer or a race car driver, so my passion was marketing. At Ford, I worked on the Motorcraft program, Motorcraft Racing, and then Ford division, worked with the car dealers, advertising agencies, and sanctioning bodies and tracks and so forth.
All these gentlemen have had great success, and our next guest, Eric, man, what you've done with corporate sponsorship at SCCA is nothing short of amazing.
Thanks, Dennis. Eric Prill, Vice President of Marketing and Communications up until about a week ago, where my role changed and I'm now COO. But with SCCA for 18 years, the last 8, very seriously involved in marketing and sponsorship. We've managed to double our partner revenue during that period of time. But we're an organization with 65,000 members that puts on about 2,000 events a year across the country. So we've got a lot of partnership opportunities with our membership, with our events, and also with business to business.
Okay, guys, I'm going to throw the first question up here, and Ken, we'll start with you. More options than ever before for sponsors, because we're starting to see more tracks, more series, event sponsorships on the car itself. How the heck do you convince the sponsor that they're making the right choice, or do they need an all-of-the-above approach to be really successful?
Well, that's like the whole half hour wrapped into one question. And that's a good question, and I think that's one of the strengths of the motorsports industry, compared to other industries that we work in and see, is that for a sponsor, for a brand, there's a huge diversity of potential opportunity for sponsorship. Each of those sectors, Dennis, have different opportunities and different value propositions for a sponsor, whether it's a facility, you have events and attendees and exposure value for their entire season. For a race team and for a driver, you have the excitement of the actual sport. That is where the sport happens. For a sanctioning body, you have the ability to be a part of a marquee brand, whether it's SCCA or IndyCar, NHRA or NASCAR. You have an opportunity to be affiliated with a high-end brand. So that doesn't exist in every sport, that type of choice. And in the sponsorship game, and I think the panelists would agree, choice is good, because the more choice that a sponsor, that a brand has coming in a sport, the higher the likelihood that they'll participate.
And Jordan, one of your big success stories was my favorite race series that I missed, the IROC Boys. And that series did such a great job of introducing people to True Value.
Yeah, there were a lot of different components to that. The one thing that was unique for True Value was it gave them 12 different race car drivers with 12 different backgrounds from around the world that were champions. And I think, to Ken's point, there are a lot of different options in the sport that can be taken advantage of. I think what the most important part is understanding what the goals and objectives are of the corporate sponsor and what they want to achieve throughout their sponsorship. And that is really where we start in dealing with a corporation, is understanding what they want to do. It's not always a clear-cut choice that they should be in Cup or in Nationwide or SCCA, or for that matter, the British Touring, Championship. It really depends on what each one of the corporate sponsors is looking for and the objectives that they need to achieve through the sponsorship.
And Sam, I can tell people that I get 30,000 people exposed to my brand at Race Talk Radio, but you're the guru of ROI metrics. How has that changed? Measuring it's not just the number of people, it's the amount of time that they spend with the brand. How do you measure all this?
Well, a lot of it's very tangible, and some of it is not. Herb Fischel made a comment earlier in the presentation about the car manufacturers, and that's pretty much my background. And there are official vehicles everywhere, and we used to always challenge ourselves as, what does that really mean? What does it mean to the manufacturer? Excuse me. And what does it mean to the car dealer, and so forth? And dealerships, when you talk about the metrics and the measurements, and it's very important, I think, for all of anybody, whether they're a track promoter or a racing team, you want an affiliation with some car manufacturer. And somehow, if you can translate that into the individual dealer, a regional advertising group, or even lucky enough to be on a national level, then what each one of those levels has a different requirement, a different basis that they go from. And I jokingly say, from a individual dealer's perspective, it's like, here's my showroom and here's the rest of the state of Texas. That's kind of how they look at it. And they really don't care what happens to the racetrack because they're not interested in the exposure aspect of it. They want traffic. They want people in their dealership showrooms. And in metropolitan areas, just to give you a number to play with, car dealers will spend in excess of $150 in promotional and advertising efforts for every single person that walks into that dealership. Not does a test drive or not asks to talk to a salesman, but just shows up at that dealership. Now, historically, and you've always heard the joke that dealers say half of my advertising is good and half of it's terrible, but we don't know which one is which. And that still holds true. But you, as a racetrack promoter, if you can equate some sort of traffic building program that you can count the people that go back to the dealerships, that's going to equate into $150 per person that comes back to that dealership. And it's not about just selling new cars, it's about selling used also. So that's just from a car dealer's perspective. But back when I was at Ford, we did mid-90s, there was this huge influx of the consumer-driven companies. Kellogg's was the first one, then Tide and Target and people like that. And all of us are scratching our heads. Kellogg's was a good example. They changed their paint scheme every weekend. And as the purists, we said, what the heck are they doing? Well, they didn't care. They were trying to expose different Kellogg's products. So we developed a team of MBA students one summer and went out and did an internship program where they went out and benchmarked all these companies, even the ones that weren't even driving Fords. We wanted to know what they were doing. Well, the commonality, Dennis, to each one of these companies was they took racing to their point of sale. They provided the customer with some sort of added value, and they built metrics into it so they could measure what was going on. So I think if you keep those kind of three elements in play when you're talking to potential sponsor, whether it's a car manufacturer or whatever that may be in your community, I think it would be helpful in trying to drive in new business opportunities.
And you mentioned, getting people to the dealership. One of the best jokes in radio advertising was a guy, went to a car dealership and he said, I want you to sponsor my radio show. And the guy says, oh, that doesn't work. Radio advertising doesn't send traffic. He says, okay, I'll run a promo for you for free for the next week that everybody that comes in, you give them $100. And he says, I'll go broke. So he says, I thought radio advertising didn't work. So it's the way you sell the product as well. Eric, you got to deal with a lot of sort of balancing acts because you do have, you know, a deal where you might have a corporate sponsorship for your brand, but a track might have a competing brand, or, you know, there's all this competition. How do you make sure that your folks get the return on investment that they're looking for?
Well, it goes back a little bit to what Jordan mentioned, and that's knowing what the corporate partner is looking for. You know, you're solving a problem for them. That's what sponsorship is. You need to develop a package that solves a problem for someone, and we have to be very sensitive to exactly what you talked about. We have corporate sponsorships for the national organization. We have 115 regions that are out. Many of them are trying to get their own sponsors. Then we have track sponsors. So it all kind of has to intricately work together. So we focus on building programs for our national organization that kind of stay out of some of those arenas. I mentioned our membership before. We focus on things that are kind of influencing the influencers. Works very well with endemic sponsors. It's important to know who your audience is. It's not just the people that are buying tickets to come into your racetrack. It's the people within the paddock. It's the people that come week in and week out and race with you, and they're an audience for you. So it's picking the right types of products to market to them, and sometimes you do have to stay away from some different things. As a sanctioning body, yeah, we're touching racetracks all across the country. A lot of times we're renting racetracks. Sometimes we're partnering with racetracks, and you have to talk about all that stuff up front. So we have to be very careful when we structure programs to make sure that we're not promising things that we can't deliver. That's the first thing that'll kill a relationship, is coming out and making promises and then having something crop up that you just can't deliver on that.
One of the things that we do on our Track Source radio show every week is Tim will pick out the headlines, and it's usually something having to do with sponsorship. Sports Business Journal is one of our go-to sources for some great stories on the business side of racing. They recently, and I'm going to toss this question out to whoever wants to tackle it. This is our $100 toss-up question this round. I saw a survey of NASCAR fans, and they got two brands wrong as far as what was the official brand of NASCAR in a particular category. They got the beer wrong. They said Budweiser, not Coors, and they got the delivery company wrong. They said FedEx versus UPS. I have a theory, and I want to see what you guys think about it. My theory is UPS and FedEx pulled back on their car sponsorship. So while they're still an official brand, they're not seen as much. Does that matter? I know I've asked a good question when I stump a panel.
I don't know if you stumped us. I think there's a lot of ways to look at it. It's a good question. First of all, FedEx did not pull back. So
No, UPS pulled back.
UPS did, but
Yeah.
FedEx did not.
Yeah.
FedEx still has a full season. I think that UPS pulled back on car sponsorship and really stopped activating their brand in a big way. As a brand marketer, I think one of the things that you have to look at is what's the value of the bar mark, and what does that NASCAR bar bring to the table, and what are you trying to achieve as a sponsor? Do you get more out of putting your logo on a horse in the Kentucky Derby, right? Yeah. Well, if you're FedEx, you get more out of putting your logo on a horse in the Brickyard 400, right? Because that horse is your power that's driving your business, and clearly the advertising around it is helping create the brand recognition that they're looking for. They also had a commercial spot this year. UPS didn't have anything. So I think, that is definitely part of it. I will say, Budweiser out of control this year, right? Coors Light kind of stale under the context of they've just been doing the same thing year in and year out. And you've got to do things different. You have to create a differentiating factor all the time to be relevant in front of the fans. They're tough.
Yeah, I agree with everything Jordan said, and I think there are a couple of additional factors. One is it takes a long time for a brand to become associated with a property. So that's both good and bad. the bad part is a brand has to invest in a sponsorship over a period of years, not one season or two. So you become affiliated with that brand, and in this case, NASCAR. The flip side of that is when you leave, you're still affiliated with that brand. It doesn't go away in the mind of the consumer. So it takes a long time for that to fade. I think a good example of that is Budweiser. Budweiser hasn't been on the inside of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where I used to work, in many years. Miller Lite has been the official beer. But they do certain things, which raises kind of the second issue, which is they advertise heavily. They'll advertise outside the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, so as the hundreds of thousands of fans pull up, they'll see Budweiser signs and assume, because of the previous affiliation, that they're still a sponsor. So I think that Sports Business Journal survey is just case in point that it takes a long time to build a relationship with a brand, and it takes a long time to undo the relationship with the brand, and consumers are just reacting.
We were having a conversation last night with a bunch of people around the oil topic. So, I'll ask the room, who's John Force's oil sponsor? Exactly wrong, right? Okay, that's one, right? But then he also has another sponsor that's Peak, which is an antifreeze brand. And, so to that same point, Castrol for years spent millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to build a brand for John Force. And John Force took that money, and I'm not by any means, this is not a slam on John Force, but it is a general principle that you now have two other oil companies that are going in and competing in that market space with that brand that, in my opinion, is no different than Mark Martin and Valvoline, where we all would say that Mark Martin and Valvoline go side by side. I know that because they're a client of ours, and still today, people believe that Mark Martin has an association with Valvoline. The John Force association with Castrol is never going to go away. And you're going to walk in retail stores years from now, and you're going to see a John Force standee because the guy never wanted to take it down. It's going to be Castrol branded.
Yeah.
But you're going to have Lucas and you're going to have Peak both spending a ton of money in brand sponsorship to support John Force and put that race car on the track. And I think it's going to be hard for him to break through that.
We went through a similar situation with our Pro Racing World Challenge Series. For a long time, it was the Speed World Challenge Series, and it was sponsored by the Speed Channel. It was airing on NBC Sports Network, and people still called it Speed World Challenge.
Yeah. Are there any questions for our panel? Okay, we got a lot of good questions. While I'm getting out there, because I'm getting old and slow as the day goes on, I'm going to toss one out to you guys again as I'm getting the mic out. Do you have to treat an emerging brand different than a brand that's been around for 200 years?
Well, I think what you're dealing with, the answer to that, from my perspective, would be yes. And I think it has to be, in every sponsor, every situation is going to be different. And I'll give you a good example. You have General Mills and Kellogg's, two companies selling the same product in the same grocery aisle in the same store. Two completely different strategies. So once again, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's very important when you're dealing with any sponsor to have a really keen understanding of why they would be interested in racing and pursue that and build your program around that concept.
I think I'd add one thing to that, and that's we always focus on the brand of the sponsor. And when you talk about new or emerging brands, the question is, if you are a seller, if you're seeking sponsorship, do you understand your brand as well as the sponsor understands his or her brand? If it's new, emerging, or established, those are two different issues. If it's established, you'll have brand equity, and if it's not, you need to create brand equity. But I think a really important sub-question to that, Dennis, is do you understand your brand if you're a seller? Because that's what sponsorship is. Otherwise, it's just advertising.
Too often, they really don't. They don't know what their goal is going to be with an advertiser. And that's something that you really got to push that issue right up front.
They also don't understand sometimes that it takes more money than just putting a decal out there or putting a sign out there at the racetrack or whatever the case may be. You have to view your sponsorship dollars as at least a 2-for-1 spend.
Question, the strong brands particularly form an emotional connection to the consumer, and brand democracy says turn your brand over to the consumers because your consumers, your fans are the brand. Do we still have an emotional connection to racing?
I mean, my opinion is based. We do a lot of work in the auto industry, and what the auto industry has seen, and I think we've seen in racing, is that people have less of an emotional connection to their car today than they did 10, 20 years ago. And there's the auto industry seeing that in sales patterns of consumers and what motivates them and what kind of emotional connection that they have. I think that is a challenge for the motorsports industry as a related factor to that, because I think people are just not as emotionally connected to motorsports as they were, say, 20 years ago, because they're not as connected to their car. So I think that that's a factor, and I think all of us as motorsports marketers and motorsports sponsorship salespeople need to really be in tune to is, one, how can we recreate that connection, and two, how can we demonstrate what connection exists to sponsors?
Our club is full of members that are absolutely still connected with their car, but it's a challenge to get to the younger demographic. You know, the people that would rather work on their mobile device or their mobile phone or play video games than jump behind the wheel of a real car. But there's exciting cars out there. I mean, the love affair with the car is still available because there are great cars out there. I mean, even entry-level cars are just so outperforming anything that was around 20 years ago. So there's great opportunity. We need to seize it, though. Yeah, in our club, a lot of the love affair is still with cars that people can work on. It does become more of a challenge with the more modern machinery. There's no question. There are people racing those things, but they're not the DIY racers. They're the people that are hiring crews and maybe have a little bit more money to put in their program.
For the smaller racetracks, not the corporate sponsorships, any advice you have for getting all your small town businesses on board, maybe even your $1,000 versus your $10,000 sponsorships, any advice on a smaller level?
I'll tell you, some of the stuff that we've done with the weekly racing series tracks with NASCAR have been phenomenal, and some of the best programs we've ever done. There is a huge world of opportunity there, and a lot of times it's because it's cost effective, and it has to stay that way. So the local community may not know that those opportunities even exist, to go for a ride in a pace car, to drop the green flag, to come out and have burgers with all your customers at the track. Like, those are simple brand activation, sponsorship opportunities that I don't think are well communicated, but we've done some great things with US Gypsum, with True Value, bringing the local stores out to the racetrack and giving them experiences, going through the pit area, sitting in the driver's meeting. You can't do that in the big leagues, right? Not with 100 people at a time. So those opportunities are the kind of things that you should be taking advantage of.
Charlie Greenhouse from Palmer Motorsports Park. As a new road race facility, one of the things that I think we're challenged with, obviously, is budget. You got all those build-up costs, and just trying to equip the track. You look at a place like Lime Rock that's established, that has a history, that has enough pro races a year, so that BMW for a long time, and now Infinity has taken on the role of supplying them with vehicles. How does a group like ours attack that problem? We're not looking for somebody to hand us a check. We're looking, certainly we'd love that, but more to the point, we're looking for somebody to help us, put together, our quality events, and in doing so, I think the equipment is something that we're really hoping to get some help with, a couple of tow trucks, a couple of pickups that we can use for utility, that kind of thing. But without even existing yet, we have pavement, everybody knows about us, but what I don't have a sense of is how to approach somebody to say, we're not a pro track, we're a club track, so we're not going to see, as the other gentleman said, we're not going to see that bigger, broader television audience, at least for a few years, and until we're successful and established. How do we approach those, those people, and where do we look to approach them?
I would start off with the car dealers first, and I tell you why, because they have the most money. It's evident in the 10 o'clock news. That's all that's advertised, that they're spending money like crazy right now because they have it. And you can do things with them to provide them. Everybody knows about the car dealer being in that community and your track, but what they want to do is affiliate themselves with you, because if they can, and Chrysler did some research a few years ago, it was kind of interesting in that a dealership with a performance image, whether it was parts, a race car in their showroom, or just a performance Mustang, for example, like that, enhanced the ability to sell the other products, totally not related to motorsports. It just gave them a different stigma as far as the consumer. So if you can build that relationship with your track and one of the manufacturing dealerships in your community, I think that's where the revenue is. Like I said, that's why you rob banks. That's where the money is.
And I just had one other really quick question for Eric, which is, he said something which is very interesting, and it resonates, but I can't figure out what it means. Sponsorship is solving a problem. How do you find out what that problem is to suggest the solution?
You have to ask. You have to you either have to be super intuitive and understand their business, but it always helps to ask. Being intuitive gets you in the door, but asking questions and meeting with people as opposed to just walking in and dropping a proposal on someone's desk. It's everything here is relationship based. So establishing a relationship and understanding their business, and then figuring out how you can help them.
Okay, we're going to do this as a lightning round question. I love stealing from game shows. Instead of having you guys give a closing statement, I want a 30-second on why motorsports racing fans are so much more brand loyal than any other sport. And Ken, we're going to kick it off with you.
Lightning round, ready, set, go. Motorsports is fortunate because its fans understand, as Dennis said, that money is the lifeblood of this sport. It is not true in the NFL. It is not true in the NBA. Those sports will go on without sponsorship. Motorsports will not. Fans know it, they appreciate it, and their way of thanking sponsors is to associate with those products, buy those products, and support those sponsors who support the sport that they love. I think it's unique to racing, and it's very strong.
Jordan.
I think Ken took 2 minutes, and we're good.
What Ken said.
I'd go first.
Honestly, I don't know that I could have answered that question much better. I think that racing fans are passionate. They're passionate from the start about their automobiles. They're passionate about their drivers. They're passionate about the brands that support it all. And because of that, they want to do everything they can to support it.
You did very good. You get an excellent bonus points for staying in time. Yes. Sam.
Well, motorsports is, or sponsorships in motorsports, sponsors are the fabric of the sport. It's the only sport that we can know of that's part of the sport. If you see a race car without any graphics on it, it's not a race car. It just really isn't viewed that way. And I think that's a key element of the sport that makes it unique from that perspective. And fans recognize the sponsor. And what's kind of confusing now, especially in NASCAR, you have so many different sponsors every week. It's hard for the fan. I was always critical of the NASCAR having the big number on the side of the car. But now I think that's the one commonality that they have, unfortunately, because you don't have that sponsor recognition every week on the same car.
Boy, isn't that true. And Eric, you get to wrap it up.
If I'm a basketball fan and LeBron James is my hero, LeBron James does not have a sponsor logo plastered on his chest. But my heroes in racing all have logos on their chest or on their cars and on their chest.
Well, those are coming.
Very good.
Foreshadowing. Jordan Bradley.
There you go. Before we thank these gentlemen, I also want to tell them that just like our safety group, we're going to be doing regular features on TrackSource about sponsorship as well. So you're going to be getting bugged by me as well. So if you have additional questions that we couldn't get answered here today, please send them my way, and we'll get the experts to give you their knowledge as well. Once again, thank our group from the sponsorship panel.